It was the last class of the day, 7th period calculus on a gloomy Friday afternoon. The kind of day where the air feels heavier, like the world's just waiting to exhale. Spring break was only hours away, and everyone in the room had mentally checked out. Most of us were slumped in our chairs, watching the clock more than the whiteboard. There was no test, no pop quiz, no surprise homework, just our laid-back teacher letting us kill time with trivia games on the projector. I remember we were taking some kind of brand logo quiz. Dumb stuff really, just to help the minutes pass faster. I was sitting next to my buddy Cole, and I clearly remember the last answer he got right before everything shifted. He'd just said Adidas with that smug look he always had when he beat me to something, and then came the voice. The loudspeaker cracked on, and our dean's voice bled through. It wasn't calm. It wasn't composed. He sounded frantic, panicked even, as he told every teacher in the building that this was not a drill and to go into immediate lockdown. Goosebumps ran up my arms, and the mood in the room instantly changed. Our fun, easygoing teacher looked different now, his face tense, his movements sharp. He snapped off the lights, closed the blinds, and motioned for us to move quietly to the corner of the room furthest from the door. There were about 20 of us, all huddled against the wall in a patch of creeping silence. After a minute or two, the low hum from the control panel at the back of the classroom stopped. That quiet hum you don't even realize you're used to, gone. We all noticed. It meant the school had cut the power. That was the moment we knew something was seriously wrong. We sat in the dark for several minutes, barely breathing. You could hear the shifting of bodies, someone quietly sniffing, the faint tap of a nervous foot. Then came something none of us were ready for, a man's voice, screaming from somewhere down the hall. It wasn't a shout for help, it was wild, erratic, dangerous. The screaming grew louder as it moved closer, and then the unmistakable sound of someone slamming on metal lockers erupted outside our room. That was when 2 girls near me started crying, shaking uncontrollably. Their fear was infectious. My heart thudded in my chest, cold sweat breaking down my neck. The man's ranting came closer, echoing through the hallway. I couldn't make out everything he was yelling, but the words, "I'll kill all of you," stuck in my head like a knife. He sounded completely unhinged. Then came the moment that really made time slow down. He started banging on our classroom door, not knocking, beating. The crying girl near the front let out a sharp scream, and I saw our teacher give her a desperate look, holding his finger to his lips, begging her to stay quiet. The pounding got worse. The man started yelling something, probably demanding we open the door, but it was hard to make out over the chaos in my own head. Every slam felt like it was shaking the door off its hinges. It must have gone on for only a minute or two, but in that room, it felt like a lifetime. And then, just as suddenly, the noise began to fade. His voice, his footsteps, the violence of it all moved down the hallway, away from us. Eventually, there was nothing. Just silence again. We stayed frozen there, unsure if it was really over. About 10 minutes passed, though it felt more like an hour. Finally, the loudspeaker came back on. The dean's voice returned, still shaken but composed enough to give us some explanation. He said a man, someone possibly suffering from a severe mental episode, had entered the school through the front doors and assaulted the woman working the reception desk. She'd managed to flee, screaming, and that's when the lockdown was called. They didn't know if he was armed or what his intentions were. At the time, our school didn't have cameras. Security was barely more than a sign-in sheet and a few tired staff members. The doors weren't reinforced. No guard at the front. It was open to anyone with enough nerve. After searching the halls and checking every classroom, they couldn't find the intruder. The dean instructed teachers to lock their doors and continue teaching, but not to let anyone out, not even for the bathroom. Later that evening, long after most students had gone home, a night shift janitor found something no one had expected. Hidden in a storage closet deep in the back wing of the school, curled up between shelves of dusty supplies, was the man. Rumor was he had a handgun in his pocket, a large one, maybe a 44, though no one was sure. The janitor must have startled him, or maybe left the door ajar, because by the time anyone else arrived, the man had disappeared again. We never got official word on whether he was caught. No news story, no follow-up from the school, just more rumors, more fear. Some people said he was taken in quietly later that week. Others swore he was never found. Me? I just try not to think about what would have happened if that door had opened. It was early October, one of those damp, heavy days where the sky hangs low and grey and everything feels slow. I was in 7th grade, and like every other student that day, I was just trying to get through lunch without too much hassle. My school divided lunch into 2 periods, the first one for 6th graders, and some of us in 7th, and the second one for the rest of 7th and all the 8th graders. I was in the first group, standing in line, half paying attention to the drizzle falling outside through the high cafeteria windows. That's when I heard what I thought was thunder, 4 sudden deep booms in the distance. At first I didn't think much of it, maybe a truck backfiring or construction somewhere nearby, but almost immediately kids started screaming. It wasn't the usual joking kind of chaos either, real panic. Staff came running through the doors, shouting at everyone to get into the multi-purpose room, pushing kids along with urgency that made it clear this wasn't some drill. People in line for lunch had to toss their food on the counters. No one cared about trays or spilled juice anymore. I followed a group of friends into the huge multi-purpose room, a big open space we usually used for assemblies and indoor PE. But this time, it was packed wall to wall with students, crammed together and buzzing with fear and confusion. The room had a long back wall made entirely of thick glass, which usually gave a nice view of the quad. But now, campus security was rushing to draw the heavy curtains across it, hiding whatever might be going on outside. Adults stood like sentries at each exit, blocking any thoughts of sneaking out or peeking beyond. Everyone was whispering, trying to figure out what was going on. Some people had started crying. Others just stared blankly at the floor or out into the room like they were trying to make sense of a nightmare. My friend Eric managed to slip away and ask one of the staff what was really happening. He came back with wide eyes and a pale face. "There's a guy outside," he told us, "right across the street from the school. Said he barricaded himself inside his house and he's threatening to hurt himself and the police if they try to make him leave." That made the atmosphere 10 times worse. It wasn't just someone dangerous. It was someone right there, just across the road, watching us through the rain. Apparently the guy had been seen pacing around outside, watching students in this strange, unsettling way. Eric told us the man was a registered sex offender, something the teachers obviously weren't saying out loud. That made everyone even more paranoid. We were basically locked in with glass between us and a man who could snap at any moment. The whole ordeal lasted over an hour, 2 full class periods lost. Some kids were sitting on the floor, hugging their knees, others just quietly mumbling about their families, their phones, wondering if their parents knew what was going on. It didn't feel like school anymore. It felt like a shelter during a storm no one saw coming. Eventually, staff started escorting us back to our classrooms. They didn't let us all go at once, just one group at a time, quietly and quickly. The halls were strangely silent, like the building was holding its breath. Later that day, when everything had finally calmed down, I learned more from Brandy, a girl who lived near the house where it all happened. She said the man had been acting off for a long time. The previous Halloween, she saw him at his window late at night. His arm was bleeding, and he was using it to write something on the glass in what she said looked like blood. "Don't come here or I'll kill you," it said. Of course, everyone thought it was part of some disturbing Halloween decoration, just a sick joke. But after this incident, no one thought it was funny anymore. It was real. The school tried to move on like nothing happened. They never officially said much, just called it an external safety issue in an email to parents. But everyone who was there knew better. We knew how close danger had come to crossing that glass wall. And every rainy day after that, when I looked out toward those houses across from the school, I couldn't help but wonder what was still hiding behind those closed curtains. I was 22, fresh out of college and trying to figure out where I belonged in the world. By some twist of fate, I landed a temporary job back at my old high school. Not as a teacher, thankfully, but as a tech intern, essentially managing computer systems and handling equipment in the basement level of the school. It was a strange, quiet place to work, but the job came with air conditioning, 2 mini fridges, a wall-mounted TV, and a surprisingly nice office for a basement. It didn't even feel like part of the school. The space was clean, almost cozy, tucked away from the buzz of students and overhead announcements. The office itself was shared between me and 2 former teachers, Mr. Ellis and Mr. Grant, but I called them Dave and Gary now. They used to teach me computer science back when I was a student. They liked me, helped me land the job, and treated me more like a colleague than some fresh-faced graduate. We got along well. Most days, we'd rotate tasks upstairs and chill down there between jobs. It was a peaceful routine. That day started like any other. Gary and Dave had both gone upstairs to handle something about paper orders or software updates. I wasn't paying much attention. I stayed behind, taking my lunch break. I just unwrapped a sandwich and started scrolling through my phone when the office line rang. It was someone from the front desk. Her voice was tight, clipped, full of tension. She told me to stay put, that the school was on lockdown, and that there was a possibly armed intruder in the building. I didn't even respond. I just hung up and sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. The office didn't have a real door, just a wide entryway with no lock. The larger basement door leading into the area didn't even latch properly. There was no way to secure the space. I switched off the lights and computer screens, then crouched behind one of the desks. The only light came from the glowing numbers on the server equipment. I texted both Gary and Dave. No answer. Maybe they were locked in a room without phones, or maybe they were just as frozen as I was. I sat in the dark, barely moving. 20 minutes passed, maybe more. The silence felt unreal. I couldn't hear anything from upstairs, but I wasn't allowed to make a call. I could only wait. Every second felt like an hour. My phone screen dimmed and locked. I just sat there, breathing carefully, hoping whatever danger was up there didn't make its way down here. Then I heard the basement door creak open. It was slow, loud, unmistakable. That long, dragging sound echoed across the hallway and spilled into the office. My pulse spiked. I stayed low under the desk, holding my breath as footsteps came down the stairs. Not slow ones. Fast, steady, deliberate. They moved through the hallway and toward my space. My hands started shaking. My legs were numb. Whoever was coming didn't speak. They just walked, step by step, until they were inside the office. The person didn't turn on the lights. They didn't say anything. They just stopped walking. I could feel someone standing only a few feet from me. My body was screaming to stay still, to stay hidden. But then came the worst sound imaginable. A text notification. My phone lit up under the desk. I saw the glow paint the floor in a small rectangle of light. I clenched my teeth, frozen in terror. Then footsteps again, closer now. I couldn't take it. I burst from under the desk in a panic, flinging myself upward. My voice cracked as I begged not to be hurt, to be left alone. A hand grabbed my arm. My legs gave out in that instant. But when I looked up, I didn't see a weapon. I saw a man in his 40s, maybe, wearing a red plaid button-up shirt, jeans, and a faded red and black cap. His face was calm, almost too calm. He said, "It's all right, man. I'm just down here hiding too. Do you know what's going on upstairs?" His tone was low, casual, like we were chatting in a break room instead of a dark basement during a lockdown. I blinked, trying to process it. He didn't look like staff. I didn't recognize him at all. Still, I managed to mumble something about a possible shooter. He nodded, then asked, "Is there an exit down here?" That's when the red flags really started going up. I pointed vaguely toward the storage hallway, but before he moved, I asked, "Who are you?" He paused. The way he hesitated, too long like he had to craft the answer, made my blood run cold. Finally he said, "I was picking up my son. A teacher told me to hide when everything started." He never mentioned a name, never said who his son was or what teacher. It felt off, too rehearsed. I glanced at my phone. The text that had just come through was from Dave. It said, "Dude, this is insane. Some guy shot Mr. Buckley. He's wearing a red plaid shirt and a hat. Don't come upstairs." My heart stopped. I was still holding the phone. I was seconds away from reading it aloud. Then I looked up again and met the man's eyes. He was watching me, really watching. And I knew he'd figured it out. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted for the stairs like every part of my life depended on it. Behind me, I heard a deafening crack. A bullet flew past me, ricocheting off something metal in the hallway. I kept running, the sound burning itself into my memory forever. I barely remember bursting through the top floor door, but when I did, there were police everywhere. Officers at every exit. One of them caught the man seconds after he pushed out the basement door. Mr. Buckley survived. I never got the full story, but apparently the man had some personal vendetta against him. No one at school ever explained it. No news story ran about it. The details just vanished into the silence. What stuck with me, though, wasn't the shot or even the fear. It was how close I came to thinking that man was just another scared parent. Before I became a full-time teacher at Westbriar High, just outside Austin, I spent a couple years subbing wherever I was needed. Mostly math, algebra, geometry, a bit of pre-calculus when they got desperate. I didn't mind it. It gave me breathing room between classes, a few quiet hours here and there. On that particular day, I had 4 classes to cover, all math, for a teacher named Ms. Harper, who'd called out sick for the week. I'd already finished 2 of those periods and had a good hour and a half of downtime before my next. Ms. Harper's classroom was empty until 6th period, so I stayed in there, half working on lesson plans, half scrolling through emails and unrelated stuff. When the bell rang to start the 6th period, the one I wasn't teaching in that room, I gathered my things and headed to the teacher's out lounge. It was located in a quiet corner of the school, tucked behind a rarely used rear entrance. I'd been there plenty of times, and it was usually empty except for the occasional sub napping between classes. The lounge was still and silent when I entered. I dropped my bag on one of the tables and sat down, enjoying the rare moment of solitude. Then I heard a knock. It came from the back exit, the one with the ID scanner. I got up and walked to the hallway window beside the door and saw a man standing there. He looked like he could have been a teacher. Clean cut, mid-50s maybe, grey hair, button-up shirt, khakis and a black jacket. Polished shoes. He smiled at me through the glass and gestured, then said loudly, "Hey, I'm Mr. Abrams. I forgot my ID this morning. Can you let me in?" There was no hesitation in his voice, no nervous energy, just calm assurance. I hesitated, but everything about his appearance said school staff. Without thinking much more about it, I opened the door. He gave me a quick thanks and brushed past me with a kind of purpose in his step. His right hand was buried in his jacket pocket. Something about the way he walked bothered me. He didn't ask where to go, didn't slow down, just headed toward the math hallway like he already knew the layout of the building. Something about it all felt off. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sat back down and opened my laptop. Every staff member at the school had access to the directory, so I typed in Abrams. I searched every school in the district, elementary, middle, high, and came up empty. No Mr. Abrams. A cold pressure settled in my chest. I picked up the phone and called the front office. "I think someone just came in through the back," I said, trying not to sound panicked. He said he was a teacher, but I checked the staff list. There's no one named Abrams anywhere. There was no time wasted. The office staff alerted security, and a lockdown message was immediately pushed through the PA system and to every classroom's emergency panel. Every light went off. Every door was locked. I stepped back into the hallway and peered down toward the math wing, staying near the corner where I could see but not be seen. That's when I heard it. A man shouting, loud and ragged, screaming the name Maria over and over, screaming that he knew she was there and she needed to open the door. Then came a crash, a kick or a shove, something slamming into a classroom door hard enough to echo down the hall. Maria, that was Ms. Harper's first name. I couldn't breathe. That classroom he was yelling at, kicking at, it was the one I had just been sitting in earlier. It was where I'd taught that morning, where I'd left my coffee cup on the desk. But she wasn't there. She'd called out sick, and thank God she had. Within minutes, sirens sounded from outside. Police poured into the school from multiple entry points. I stayed out of the way, pressed back against the wall, listening to the scuffle happening just out of view in the intersecting hallway. They got him. I didn't see the takedown, but I knew they had him when the shouting stopped. It turns out he wasn't a teacher. He wasn't even supposed to be anywhere near a school. He was Maria Harper's ex-husband. No one told me much else officially, but the rumors that spread in the following days were enough to piece it together. He had shown up, knowing she was out sick and pretending to be a staff member. Some said he had a gun tucked into his pocket. Others said he planned to kill her. Maybe both. We'll never know for sure. The police never released those details. Maria didn't come back for the rest of the semester. She was put on leave, maybe moved, maybe transferred somewhere. Nobody really knew what happened to her. The school never issued a public statement beyond the usual PR-safe nonsense about ensuring student safety and reviewing entry procedures. But I know what happened. I opened that door. I still think about it even now. The way he looked at me through the glass, the smile, the fact that he walked with such certainty toward the math wing, like he knew exactly where to find her. If she hadn't called out sick that week, if she'd been in that room instead of me, would I be writing about this at all? I don't know how close I came to witnessing something far worse, and maybe it's better I never find out. But I do know that ever since that day, I've never opened a school door without checking ID first. No matter how familiar someone looks, no matter how harmless they seem. Because for one moment I believed a lie, and that lie almost led someone to a classroom full of students. It happened during my freshman year at Grayson University in Massachusetts. Winter had settled in hard by then, days that turned dark before 5, sidewalks crusted with ice, wind that cut through coats like paper. I lived in one of the dorms on the north end of campus, a basic 4-story brick building. All freshmen were placed on the first floors, which felt like both a privilege and a vulnerability depending on the day. That evening, my last class wrapped up early. It was a philosophy lecture, and the professor had let us go before 5, which was unusual. Outside, the sky was already black, the streetlights just flickering on. My breath came out in clouds, and I remember how quiet the walk back to my dorm felt. No cars, no voices, just the crunch of snow under my boots and the buzz of my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the university alert system had pushed through a text. It was all caps, the kind you don't ignore. The message warned students and faculty to stay inside. A suspicious man had been reported wandering the campus, approaching female students with crude threats. It also mentioned he claimed to have a gun, though that hadn't been confirmed. Campus police were actively searching for him. I quickened my pace, heart thudding a little harder with every step. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds. The campus was dimly lit and I couldn't help but scan every shadow. That's when I noticed someone behind me. He wasn't far, maybe 50 feet back. A tall man in a massive winter coat, hood up, hands deep in his pockets. I couldn't make out his face, and part of me told myself he was just another student heading to his dorm. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Maybe it was the coat, maybe the timing, or maybe it was the way he kept a steady pace, never slowing or speeding up. Just walking, always the same distance behind me. I didn't run. Not yet. But I didn't walk slow either. When I got to the dorm entrance, I pulled out my ID and scanned it against the reader. The outer door clicked open. I slipped inside, shut the first door behind me, and turned toward the second. That's when I heard the first door shudder. He had hit it, hard. I jumped, my hand already gripping the second door handle. I turned back and saw him standing just outside the glass, staring in. His face was visible now, middle-aged, maybe early 40s. Rough beard, eyes that didn't seem quite right. He banged on the glass again and said, "Can you let me in? I'm freezing." I stared at him through the glass. He smiled as if that might help. I asked him loudly, "Do you live here?" He nodded. "Yeah, 3rd floor." "What room?" I pressed. He didn't answer. Just kept staring, hands still deep in his coat pockets. "What's your room number?" I asked again. Nothing. I shook my head. "Sorry, I can't." That's when his smile twisted. His expression changed into something else, mocking, vile. He leaned forward and began saying things I won't repeat. Horrible things, violent threats. He licked the glass. His eyes didn't blink. He started describing, in graphic detail, what he wanted to do to me. I froze, disgusted, heart racing. I turned and ran down the hallway. My room was 3 doors down. I fumbled with my keys and pushed inside, locking the door behind me. The room was dark. My roommate wasn't back yet. I turned on the lights and grabbed my phone with trembling hands. I texted the dorm group chat. "I think the creepy man the school warned about is at the front door. Don't come out." Replies came fast. People were freaking out, some already calling campus security. I pulled up the university's emergency number and called. When they asked if he was still there, I hesitated, then stepped to the window. He was there, right outside, on the ground level beneath my window, looking up. His mouth stretched into a grin, his head shaking slowly side to side. He saw me. He knew I was there. And then he started doing something with his tongue, something that made me drop the phone in revulsion. I screamed, 3 sharp, gasping seconds of terror before I picked the phone back up and begged the dispatcher to send someone now. He took off running after that, sprinting into the darkness, disappearing into the far end of the courtyard, where the light from the lampposts couldn't reach. Police arrived minutes later. They came to my room and took my statement. I described his coat, his face, everything I could remember. They told me to stay locked in for the rest of the night and advised I let my neighbors know to do the same. Later that evening, another alert went out, specifically addressed to everyone in our building. They still hadn't found him. There was no confirmation of a weapon, but they weren't taking chances. Extra patrols were set up for the rest of the week. For days, I flinched every time I walked past a window. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I wondered if it was him. I didn't see him again. And as far as I know, they never caught him. No name, no follow-up announcement, nothing. He vanished into the night the same way he arrived, quiet, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. I try not to think too hard about what might have happened if I'd opened that door. But sometimes, on cold nights when the wind howls against the dorm windows, I still remember the look in his eyes, and I still check the locks, twice. Back when I was in 2nd grade, school felt like a safe little world. We had themed days, brightly colored hallways, and a rotating schedule of specials, art on Mondays, music on Tuesdays, and so on. I wasn't exactly the most social kid. I was quiet, a little odd, and I often did things without really thinking them through. Maybe it was just being young, or maybe something deeper, but that day something inside me just acted without asking for permission. It happened during art class. Our teacher, Ms. Green, was walking around the room, checking on our paper sculptures or whatever messy projects we were making that week. The classroom buzzed with chatter and laughter. On a whim, without raising my hand or saying anything, I stood up, grabbed the big green plastic crayon, our designated bathroom pass, and walked right out the door. I wasn't supposed to do that. Everyone knew we had to ask first, but something about the moment made it feel okay. I didn't want to interrupt. I wasn't trying to be bad. I just needed to pee. The bathroom was a decent walk down the hallway, almost at the far end of the wing. I remember entering and going into one of the stalls. I always sat on the toilet back then, just felt more secure. As I sat there, pants around my ankles, the intercom outside buzzed on with a strange energy, and then a voice, calm but firm, announced that the school was entering lockdown. This is not a drill. My heart dropped. I sat frozen for a second, unsure what to do. I don't even remember if I finished going. I just pulled up my pants and rushed out of the stall, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The hallway outside was already dim. Every classroom door was closed. The lights behind those little windows were off. I realized I was completely alone, and more than that, I was locked out. I walked down the hall quickly, trying to think of what to do. That's when I saw a man walking toward me from the far end. At first, I thought he was a teacher. He wasn't dressed like one, though. No badge, no walkie-talkie, just plain clothes, dark jeans and a sweatshirt. I was too young to process it properly. I didn't know how to read body language or pick up on red flags. I was just relieved to see an adult. I said, "Excuse me, I'm locked out of my classroom." He looked at me with a weird smile, tilted his head and said, "Oh, that's okay, come with me, I'll show you where to go." Without hesitating, he reached out and grabbed my hand. We started walking together. Me, small and naive, him, quiet and focused, toward what I later realized was the back exit. At the time, I didn't understand why we weren't heading toward the main office or a classroom. I didn't question it. I just followed him, trusting that he was there to help. Then I heard it. My name. Someone was shouting it down the hallway behind us. "Troy!" It was a woman's voice, urgent, strained, terrified. "Troy, get back here!" I turned. It was Ms. Green. She came sprinting down the hallway, her face red, her arms pumping. She didn't stop until she was right behind us. She reached forward, grabbed my other arm, and yanked me away from the man's grip. Her voice cracked as she said, "Don't touch him!" The man didn't argue. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, and watched silently as she dragged me backward down the hall. She pulled me into the art classroom, slammed the door shut, and turned the lock. She didn't say much, just looked at me with wide eyes, crouched in front of me and whispered, "Don't ever do that again." I think she was crying, or close to it. I sat quietly in the corner of the room with my classmates, avoiding their eyes. Some of them stared at me like I'd done something terrible. Others just looked scared. I felt embarrassed, confused, and small. The lockdown lasted another half hour. None of us spoke. We just stayed huddled together, the lights off, the room still. Eventually, the principal's voice came over the loudspeaker announcing the lockdown was over. I heard Ms. Green talking on the phone, her voice low but serious. Not long after, another announcement came. School was ending early. Parents were being called. My mom arrived quickly. She wasn't upset with me, just shaken. I didn't even fully understand what had happened until years later, when I pieced everything together. I don't know who the man was. I don't know what he planned to do. But I know now that he wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't staff. He had slipped in somehow during the confusion and nearly walked out of the school with me in broad daylight. And no one would have known until it was too late. Ms. Green never brought it up again. She treated me the same as before, though maybe a little more watchfully. I never walked out of a classroom again without asking. Ever. Looking back, I realize how close I came to something awful. Something that could have haunted more than just a school day. It's hard to say what would have happened if she hadn't come running, but she did, and that made all the difference. It happened in the spring of my junior year, late April or maybe early May. I played the double bass in the wind ensemble at Bayshore High, a school tucked along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Mornings always started early for us. We'd meet in the band hall before classes officially began, tuning our instruments, going over difficult measures, and preparing for the next performance or contest. The band hall was a familiar place, a second home for many of us. A massive room tucked into the back corner of the school, with its own set of double doors that opened directly to the outside. It was convenient, but we all knew the rule. Those doors stayed locked. No one came in unless they were a student with ID. No exceptions. We'd been reminded of it countless times. That morning, we were halfway through a difficult piece when I heard a knock. Just two dull thuds on the metal outside door. I was on the edge of the ensemble, standing with my bass near the wall, so I heard it more clearly than anyone else. I glanced over, saw the silhouette of someone outside the window, but said nothing at first. We were in mid-performance, and I figured it was probably another student who forgot their ID. It happened more often than you'd think. Then, without checking, one of the percussionists, Matt, I think, walked over and opened the door. Just like that. No hesitation, no peek through the glass, just turned the handle and let whoever it was inside. We all stopped playing when we saw the man walk in. He wasn't a student, not even close. Middle-aged, maybe mid-40s. Short, maybe 5'6". Dark complexion, Latino, I think. Wearing a grey hoodie and baggy cargo shorts, hands buried deep inside the front pocket of his sweatshirt. He moved with a strange confidence, like he didn't care who saw him, or maybe he didn't realize he wasn't supposed to be there. The entire room seemed to shift. A wave of silence swept over the ensemble. Our band director, Mr. Lowry, stepped forward immediately. His tone was calm, but I saw the flicker of worry behind his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice louder than usual. The man stopped about 15 feet into the room, right near the back row of flutes and clarinets, and replied in broken English, "I'm here to check out my daughter." Mr. Lowry frowned. "This isn't where you check students out. You need to go to the front office." The man paused, then asked, "Where is that?" Mr. Lowry didn't hesitate. "Out these doors. Make a right. Go all the way down the hallway. It's at the front of the school." The man nodded once, quickly turned and walked out the same way he came in, but not back outside. He went deeper into the school. I didn't move. None of us did. My double bass stood between me and the direction he'd gone. I remember gripping its neck tightly, trying to breathe slow and steady, trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining the heavy lump inside the man's hoodie pocket. I couldn't say for certain what it was, but the way he cradled it with both hands buried deep, it wasn't right. It wasn't natural. Once he was out of sight, Mr. Lowry picked up the phone and dialed school security. We all just stood there, watching him, waiting. Minutes later, an announcement came over the intercom. The school was on lockdown. The lights were turned off, the doors locked, and we were ushered into the back of the room, some of us cramming into the large instrument lockers, others crouched between timpani and percussion cabinets. We barely had room to breathe. The air felt thick, claustrophobic, heavy with silence. 5 minutes later, the band hall doors burst open and two armed security guards rushed in, weapons drawn, heading in the same direction the man had disappeared. I didn't see them again. The lockdown lasted another 10, maybe 15 minutes. Then finally, we were told it was over. Just like that. No explanation, no follow-up, nothing. Classes resumed like it had all been part of some weird drill. But I knew better. We all did. There was no official email from the school, no news coverage, not even a mention over the morning announcements. But students talk, and the story spread fast. Apparently, the man had committed an armed robbery less than a mile from the school. Police had been chasing him through nearby neighborhoods when he ditched his car and ran across campus. No plan, no real escape strategy, just panic and instinct. He must have thought the school would be a good place to hide. He wasn't there to pick up his daughter. That much was clear. No one at school matched his story. The front office didn't have any record of a student with his last name. Later, I heard from a friend's older brother who worked part-time for the school district that the man had been arrested with a firearm on him. A small pistol tucked into his hoodie. That explained the weight I saw in his front pocket. That explained the way Mr. Lowry kept his tone so calm, never escalating, never raising his voice. He was buying time. We were lucky. The man hadn't panicked. He hadn't pulled the weapon. He hadn't done anything rash. He'd just walked into a building full of students, paused, and walked out again. But it could have gone very differently. The percussionist who opened the door never got in trouble. Not officially. But he carried the guilt for a while. We all did, in a way. What scared me the most wasn't the weapon, or even the idea of a stranger walking freely through our school. It was the realization that all it took was one bad judgment, one open door, one moment of not checking the window before turning the handle, and suddenly, everything we thought was safe wasn't. I was in 4th grade when it happened. I went to a small private Catholic school in the suburbs, tight-knit, quiet, the kind of place where nothing truly bad was ever expected to happen. At least, that's what we all believed. Every few weeks we'd have a lockdown drill. Most of us didn't take them seriously. It was a game. An excuse to huddle in the corner and whisper jokes, pretending it was some kind of hide and seek. We were just kids. We didn't know better. That day started like any other. The sky was clear, the air crisp. I remember because I had forgotten my jacket and was shivering during morning recess. Everything felt normal. We were in the middle of religion class when the announcement came. The intercom crackled to life. "We are going into lockdown. This is not a drill." At first, some of the kids laughed. They thought it was another practice round. A few made dramatic faces like they were in a spy movie. But our teacher, Mr. Callahan, didn't laugh. His expression shifted instantly. He told us to get into the corner, now. He rushed to turn off the lights, close the blinds and lock the door. That was when we realized this wasn't a drill. We huddled together in silence, 30 of us crammed along the wall, breathing hard in the darkness. The only light in the room came from the thin strip at the bottom of the door and the narrow glass window beside it. One of those small vertical rectangles you could peek through if you stood close enough. For a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of our own breathing. Then we heard him, screaming. It started faint, almost like a chant. One man's voice, growing louder as he came closer. At first it was just gibberish to us, words we couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, furious, broken, unhinged. The kind of screaming that doesn't come from pain, but from rage. It echoed down the hall, bouncing off the walls, getting closer. Some of the kids near the window started crying quietly. Others had their hands over their ears. I pressed my knees into my chest and stared at the door. Then the screaming stopped right outside. The man was at our classroom. We could hear him breathing, ragged and loud, just beyond the door. Then came the pounding, fists slamming into the door again and again, making it rattle on its hinges. A few kids let out short screams. Our teacher moved slowly toward the door but didn't speak. He just held up his hand, as if trying to calm the panic without using words. The man outside started yelling. At first it was more nonsense, but then he started shouting things that still burn in my memory. "Your God is dead," he screamed. "Jesus didn't die for your sins." His voice cracked as he shouted, "You're all going to burn." The room was paralyzed. No one moved. No one even cried anymore. We just sat there staring at the locked door as the man hurled more and more hateful phrases at us. He started yelling things in a different language, phrases I couldn't understand at the time, but I'd later learned they were religious, possibly Arabic, though not in prayer, more like curses, condemnations. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I see you. I hear you. Open the door." He kept yelling, kept slamming the door, but we never opened it. We didn't move. It felt like hours. Eventually, his voice began to fade. The pounding stopped. He continued screaming as he moved down the hall, further and further away, his words still echoing around corners. And then another sound. Multiple voices yelling, men's voices louder and sharper. There was a scuffle out in the hallway, a burst of chaos and yelling. Then, finally, silence. But the lockdown didn't end. We stayed in that room for what felt like another half hour. The lights stayed off. Our teacher didn't say anything. He just sat down on the floor with us, his back to the door. Eventually, the intercom came on again. The voice from the front office told us the lockdown was over and that our parents were being called to pick us up. We weren't going back to class. My mum didn't work during the day, so she arrived quickly. I remember the way she looked at me, worried, confused, holding me tighter than usual. I didn't understand it all back then. I was still trying to process what had happened. It wasn't until later that I realized how serious it really was. The man wasn't just some prankster or someone who wandered in by accident. He'd come there for a reason. No one ever confirmed exactly who he was, but everyone said the same thing. He had hatred in his eyes. No one got hurt that day. But something was taken from us. Innocence, maybe. That feeling of being untouchable in a place filled with crayons and hymns. After that, lockdowns weren't a game anymore. And I never walked past that door without remembering the voice on the other side screaming about hell and fire. I don't know what became of him. The school never told us. Maybe they didn't want to scare us more than we already were. But I do know this. After that day, none of us ever forgot the sound of his voice. I was 26 when I started teaching 8th grade math at Sycamore Ridge Middle School. Most people assume middle school teachers are older, seasoned, maybe in their 40s, but I was fresh off my teaching certification, ambitious, and still holding on to the kind of nervous energy that comes with being new in a system that runs on quiet routine and tightly monitored chaos. Looking back now, I think if I had been older, if I had just a few more years of life under my belt, I might have reacted differently to what happened that day. It was during 4th period, right in the middle of a lesson on linear equations. I was writing something on the whiteboard when the loudspeaker suddenly clicked on with a sound we all recognized. But this time, the tone was different. It wasn't a drill. We were trained to know the difference between the alerts, and this one was unmistakably the real thing. Immediate lockdown. Without a word, I dropped the marker and rushed to the door. Every classroom in our school has a large glass panel built into the door. There are roll-down blinds attached to cover it, and part of the lockdown protocol includes pulling that blind down so no one can see inside. I flipped off the lights and whispered for my students to move quickly and quietly to the designated corner, furthest from the door and out of the direct line of sight. The hallway lights dimmed as well, leaving only the faint glow of the emergency backlights. That was the first time I saw those kick on. That alone told me this wasn't just some precaution. Something serious was happening. My classroom was the first one off the main lobby. There were only 2 hallways branching off from the front entrance, and the math wing, where my room was the closest to the doors. I didn't hear any noise outside at first. No footsteps, no shouting. Just a heavy silence settling in, like the whole building was holding its breath. I picked up the classroom phone and dialed the front office. It rang 4 times before I hung up. No answer. That in itself made my stomach twist. Those phones never went unanswered, even during drills. Then the knocking started. It was urgent, frantic, the kind of knocking that comes from desperation. A man's voice called out from behind the door. "Please, let me in." I froze. The voice didn't sound like one of my students. It was too deep, too strained. My students looked at me, their faces pale, wide-eyed. The voice kept pleading, a soft whimper of panic threaded into each word. "Please, I can see you. I know you're in there." I tiptoed toward the door, staying just out of sight, and quietly asked, "Who's there? What's your name?" He answered quickly, "Cody, I'm a student. I need help. I'm scared. I need to get in." But the way he said it didn't sit right with me. His voice was trying to sound higher, forced, unnatural, and his shadow behind the blind was too tall, too solid. I didn't buy it. I stayed silent and slowly backed away, motioning with my hand for my students to remain still. I returned to the corner and crouched beside them. That's when things got worse. The man outside started thrashing at the door, jiggling the handle, pounding harder, shouting, "Let me in," again and again. One of the girls near me covered her mouth to keep from crying. Another boy grabbed my arm and wouldn't let go. I whispered to stay calm, to keep quiet. I didn't know what else to do. Minutes passed, long ones, then the noise stopped. We waited, barely breathing. About half an hour later, the intercom came back on. The voice told us that the lockdown was over and that it was safe. Police had cleared the building. Slowly, cautiously, I stood and opened the classroom door. The hallway was still dim, but I could hear voices. Staff, officers, the buzz of radio chatter echoing down the corridor. Later that day, we were briefed, faculty only. The person trying to get into my room wasn't a student. He was a man in his early 20s with long hair and a faded army-style jacket. Security footage showed him wandering around the front lobby, clearly lost or confused, or possibly high. He'd been seen holding something in his hand that resembled a small handgun. They never confirmed if it was real or a replica. He had entered the school through an unlocked side door. No one saw him come in. He wandered near the math wing for a while, trying doors, before eventually finding an exit. He left through the back, completely unnoticed, at least until someone reviewing the security feed caught it and alerted police. They found him 2 hours later at a gas station a few blocks away. He didn't have the gun with him anymore. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I'd opened that door, if I'd believed him, if he'd been armed. The school didn't hold a special assembly. They didn't talk to the students about it beyond a generic statement about safety, but for days afterward, I noticed how quiet my class became, how the usual chatter before the bell was gone, how they looked at me differently, like they suddenly realized I wasn't just there to teach math, I was there to protect them too. And for all my nerves and doubt, I had done that much. This happened when I was in college, not long ago, maybe 2 years back. I had about an hour between classes, which usually meant finding a quiet place to sit, eat something, and scroll my phone. But on that day, I needed to use the restroom first, and I hated using the busy ones, the ones in the main buildings where students were constantly in and out. So I went to the activity center. It was a little out of the way, quiet during the early part of the day, and right next to the building where my next class would be. That building always felt oddly still, like most people didn't even realize it was open. The lobby was empty except for a man sitting on the edge of the front desk. He looked up from his phone when I walked in and said, "Good morning." I nodded, said it back politely, and kept walking. He seemed like a front desk staff member, maybe a student worker or part-time employee. I didn't give him a second thought. The hallway curved around toward the bathrooms. I headed into the women's restroom and took the second stall. A minute later, I heard the main door open. "Anyone in here?" a man's voice called. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't sound like a janitor or someone calling out casually. There was an edge to it, an awareness that he shouldn't be there. I didn't respond, hoping maybe he'd leave, but he didn't. I heard slow footsteps approaching my stall, deliberate and quiet. Then a light tap on the door, not knocking, just tapping. Fingertips maybe. Then, through that tiny sliver between the stall door and the frame, I saw his face, his eye. He was pressing his head right up to the gap, peering in. I snapped, "Someone's in here." His voice came back, calm but too smooth. "Why didn't you answer when I asked?" Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "This building's going into lockdown. A student with a weapon was spotted on campus." I was still staring at the door, my mind spinning. Why was he in the women's restroom? Why was he telling me about a lockdown? But part of me wanted to believe him. He had a phone in his hand and showed me a text message. It looked like a university alert, a warning to stay inside and lock all doors. "I'm just helping out," he said. "We should block the door." He pulled a large trash bin across the restroom, wedging it in front of the door. For a few seconds, I actually felt safer, like maybe this was just some awkward misunderstanding. Maybe he really was a worker and was following emergency procedure. But then we were just standing there, together, in the women's restroom in silence. I tried to break it, asked if he knew anything else about the situation. He just said, "No other info." But he didn't stop looking at me, not even for a second. No blinking, no glance at his phone, just eyes fixed on mine. Something about that stare made my blood run cold. I pulled out my phone and started tapping away, mostly pretending to scroll to create some space between us. Then, out of instinct, I opened my university's website. It always posted alerts when something big happened on campus. But nothing. No lockdown, no active alerts, no mention of any weapon or warning. I checked my phone again, no emergency text. That's when I asked, "What's your name?" He smiled faintly and said, "Eli, I work here." I looked him up and down. His hoodie was baggy and nondescript. Light blue jeans, scuffed brown boots. He looked more like a guy fixing a vending machine than a campus employee. I stopped talking. I just texted two of my friends, people I knew were on campus at that time, and asked, "Did you hear about someone with a weapon?" They both texted back instantly. "Nope, everything's normal." No one else knew anything. No lockdown, no emergency, no announcement. That's when I knew I was in danger. When I looked up, he was closer. Just a step or two, but enough for me to feel it in my chest. Then he said something that hit like a bell ringing in my ears. "I think I heard something. We should go hide in the stalls." He motioned toward one of them. Then he extended his arm, slowly, like he was about to guide me there. Like he expected me to follow. My legs wouldn't move. My hands were shaking. Then I did the only thing I could think to do. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could. It wasn't words, just raw panic. My voice cracked. My body tensed. He flinched at the noise like it physically hit him. Then, just as quickly, he spun around, yanked the trash bin away from the door, and shoved it open. I ran out a few seconds after him, looking around, heart pounding, legs barely carrying me. I didn't stop until I made it out the main entrance of the building and into daylight. I called my mum first, shaking, crying, trying to put together words. She called campus police for me. She drove over to meet me, and we talked to an officer together. I gave them everything I remembered, what he looked like, what he said, what I saw on his phone. I didn't know if they believed me at first, but they were kind and careful. The next day, they called me back. They checked the security footage from the activity center. They confirmed he didn't work for the school. They didn't know who he was, no records, no visitor log. He had just been there. They said they'd continue investigating. But I never got another update. No one ever told me if they found him. No one followed up. I don't know if he was a student, someone from the area, or a complete stranger. But I do know he had locked me in a bathroom and lied about a lockdown to isolate me. And if I hadn't screamed, if I had followed him into that stall, I don't want to imagine what would have happened. It was a Friday, warm, sunny and breezy. One of those rare spring afternoons when you could almost taste summer on the air. I was in my senior year of high school, and by ninth period, the day was basically over. For me, it literally was. Ninth period was an off period, which meant I could leave early, and so could a few of my friends, Ryan and Scott. Another one of our friends, Tyler, only had ninth off on alternating days, and this wasn't one of them. But we were all texting in a group chat, trying to make beach plans. It was just that kind of day. Tyler said he was going to try sneaking out of gym early to meet us out back before anyone noticed. So Ryan, Scott and I waited near the end of the hallway by the gym. an area mostly dead during that time, except for kids heading to PE. We leaned against the wall, chatting about sunscreen and beach playlists, killing time. There was a set of exit doors at the far end of the gym hallway, doors that were not supposed to be used as an entrance. They were exit only, but then they opened. A man stepped through. Even though it was around 80 degrees out, he was dressed head to toe in black. Black sweatpants, a zipped-up hoodie with the hood over his head, and a bulky black backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't speak, he didn't nod. He just walked past us slowly, looking directly at each one of us as he passed. Not a glance, a stare, sharp and pointed, like he was carving our faces into memory. Ryan, never one to let anything go unchallenged, muttered, "What, got a problem?" The guy stopped. He turned to face Ryan, took a small step forward and asked, "You got something to say to me?" His voice was calm but cold. Scott and I stepped in quickly, trying to play it off. "Forget it," we said. "It's nothing." The guy stood there a second longer, then turned and continued walking down the hallway toward the gym lockers. We all went quiet. "Sketchy as hell," Ryan muttered. We agreed. Something about that guy didn't sit right. He looked like he could have been a student, but none of us recognized him. Maybe a transfer. Maybe someone older with bad facial hair. He just didn't belong. We waited a few more minutes, expecting Tyler to come bursting out the gym doors, but instead, we got a text. "Can't sneak out yet. Gym teacher called lockdown. Everyone's hiding." Our stomachs dropped. Lockdown. We hadn't heard anything. No intercom, no siren, no announcement, just silence. Then we realized the doors separating our hallway from the gym had been quietly shut and locked behind us. We looked at each other, and the reality settled in like a crashing wave. That guy, the one in all black, he was the reason for the lockdown. I didn't even have time to finish the thought before we heard something from further down the hall. A loud, sharp, popping sound, then another, then a third. For a split second I tried to rationalize it. A desk tipping over, a slammed locker, someone dropping a book. Then came the screams. We didn't wait to confirm. We turned and ran. The same doors the man had entered through were still open. We pushed through them and sprinted outside, not looking back, at least not right away. My lungs were burning before we even made it halfway across the backfield, toward the tree line that bordered the school property. The woods were just beyond the lot, and all we could think about was finding cover. I looked back once. He was following. He was running full speed down the hallway after us, his arms pumping, his legs moving hard, and even from that distance, I could see he was yelling something. His voice didn't carry clearly, but I caught one sentence, shouted like a curse, hurled into the wind. "I'm going to kill you, Fed!" We hit the trees and pushed through the underbrush until we were hidden behind thick trunks and tangled vines. I collapsed to the ground and pressed my face into the dirt, trying to slow my breathing. Scott lay next to me, chest heaving. Ryan just stood for a second before finally ducking behind a tree. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Then we heard him again. Footsteps, crunching twigs, snapping branches. He was in the woods. He was looking for us. I didn't dare lift my head, but I could hear him getting closer, then further away, then closer again. My heart was pounding so loudly I was afraid he'd hear it. My face was burning, and every nerve in my body told me to stay still, stay hidden, stay small. Eventually the sound of his footsteps faded. Either he'd given up or moved in the wrong direction. We waited until we couldn't hear him anymore, then got up and made a break for it. We sprinted through the trees, jumped the fence behind the senior lot, and made it to my car. I don't even remember unlocking it, just piling in and slamming the doors shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the key in the ignition. We drove straight to my house. Needless to say, the beach was out of the question. That night, the story spread like wildfire. Everyone on social media was posting updates, rumors, questions. One detail stood out. Apparently, a new teacher had been shot, twice. He was rushed to the hospital. People were saying he might not make it. Later, we heard he'd survived, but just barely. The shooter's identity was never publicly revealed. Some students said he wasn't a student at all, just some guy with a grudge. Others claimed he had been lurking near a house next to the school earlier that day, doing something that got the neighbors suspicious. One neighbor supposedly called it in after seeing him urinating on their property. Another reported his clothes, black layers on a sweltering spring day, as a red flag. All we know is that he came through a door that should have been locked. He walked into the school like he belonged there, and we made the mistake of talking to him. Ryan never forgave himself. He was convinced the guy had targeted us because of their exchange. I don't know if that's true, but it's hard not to think about it sometimes. How quickly things escalated, how little time we had to react, and how easily we could have ended up in the wrong place at the worst moment. We got lucky. That's the only explanation. Some days I still dream about that run through the woods, the sound of twigs breaking, the silence when we hit the ground, the wild hope that he wouldn't find us, and the cold reality that he almost did. I was 16 and in my third year of high school, just trying to survive another dull Thursday. Our school was massive, 3 floors tall, but even that wasn't enough for the number of classes offered. So a few years back, they'd converted an old janitor's section of the basement into 2 small classrooms. Everyone called it the bunker, even though it was officially labeled Lower Hall 2. It always had this musty, cold air to it, and the overhead lights flickered just slightly if you stared too long. There were no loudspeakers down there, and because of that, the administration avoided scheduling any first-period classes there. No way to hear announcements. But despite the eeriness, everyone fought to get a class there. It was always cooler in the summer, and it had a bathroom nearby, which was rare. That day, my 5th period was lunch, and 6th was astronomy, held in one of those 2 basement rooms. I was good at the class, and usually finished our quizzes quickly. That day was no different. I handed mine in fast and texted my friend Dev, who was in the other basement classroom. I told him to meet me in the bathroom to kill some time. He replied with a thumbs up. I stepped out of class, the hallway dim as always, and waited until he pushed through the bathroom door a few moments later, smirking. We messed around, cracking jokes, talking about nothing. Dev checked his phone and said someone just texted him that the school had gone into lockdown. We both grinned. The teachers hadn't noticed us leaving, so in our dumb teenage minds, this was a free pass to explore. If we got caught, we'd just say we never heard the announcement in the basement. Totally plausible. The real excitement started the second we cracked open the door from the basement to the main hallway. All the lights were off, not just dim. Off. The halls were nearly black, lit only by faint sunlight leaking through the glass at the lobby doors far ahead. Normally, during lockdown drills, they left the lights on. This felt different, off in a way I couldn't quite explain. Dev stepped out farther into the hall, his sneakers whispering against the tile, and then stopped dead. "Who's that?" he asked, voice low. I followed his gaze. Someone was walking toward us. At first, I thought it might be a janitor or one of the older teachers, but as the figure came closer, everything felt wrong. He didn't wear anything that resembled school staff gear. He was scruffy, layered in old, dirty clothes, and his gait was slow but focused. Too focused. "Let's go," I muttered, yanking Dev back. We shut the basement door behind us fast and quietly. The hallway was empty again. Both classroom doors were locked, blinds pulled, lights off. The silence was deep, pressing. We slipped into the bathroom and turned off the light. I grabbed Dev's arm, and we ducked into the farthest stall, hiding in the shadows. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow. There were no vents, no hum of fluorescent lights, just the occasional dripping of a faucet. Then came the click of the bathroom door opening. Light spilled briefly in from the hallway before it shut again, plunging us into darkness. We didn't move. We didn't speak. Footsteps began, slow and deliberate, walking toward our end of the room. Then the breathing started. Heavy, uneven, like someone who'd just run a mile. It wasn't either of us. I felt Dev's whole body tense beside me. Then, like an idiot, he leaned close and whispered, "We've got to crawl under to the other side." It was barely a whisper, but in the stillness of that tiled room, it might as well have been shouted. The heavy breathing stopped. The footsteps shifted. I grabbed his shirt and mouthed, "Go," and we started crawling, under the stall divider to the next, then the next. As we reached the third, we heard movement again, quick pounding footsteps and something slamming against the stall we'd just vacated. We didn't wait. We scrambled out, burst from the bathroom and into the basement hallway again. The lights flickered overhead as we pounded on the door to Dev's classroom. The teacher cracked it open, saw us and yanked us inside fast, locking the door behind. Dev started explaining everything about the guy, the bathroom, the man's clothes. He mentioned seeing what looked like a gun tucked under the man's jacket. I hadn't seen it myself, but I didn't argue. Everyone in the room was pressed into the far corner, quiet, pale. This wasn't funny anymore. A loud thud hit the door, and half the class gasped. I saw him, standing outside the tiny door window, twisting the knob, glaring through the glass like he was trying to burn his way in with his eyes. Then, just like that, he turned and walked away. We heard his footsteps retreat up the stairs. No one said a word for what felt like an eternity. The teacher asked us more questions in hushed tones, shaking his head with every answer we gave. An hour passed, maybe more. Then the phone rang. He picked it up and nodded. It was over. We lined up, walked silently out of the basement and into the main lobby. There were cops everywhere. One patted me on the back after we gave our statements. They wanted everything, what he looked like, what he wore, what he said, which was nothing. Dev did most of the talking. We were finally told to go home. I never saw anything about it in the news. No articles, no local stories. It was like it never happened. But the school got new cameras, new locks and tighter rules after that. And I never took another class in the basement. I still don't know what that man wanted. But I believe, with everything in me, that he walked into that bathroom to kill someone. Maybe us, maybe anyone. But he had intent, and we were just unlucky enough to catch his attention. I served as a police officer in New Jersey for 2 full decades, and during that time, I witnessed things most people couldn't stomach. But one call, just one, still wakes me up in the middle of the night with my pulse racing and the hairs on my arms standing straight. It happened on a grim, storm-heavy afternoon. Rain clung to the windshield like sweat, and the sky looked like it had been drained of all light. My radio crackled, and dispatch called my unit number. There was a lockdown in progress at a nearby middle school. The name of the school doesn't matter, and for legal reasons I won't say it. But it was in a quiet part of town, tucked between 2 churches and a row of trees. Supposedly, a suspicious man had been seen stepping out of a white van parked behind the school. Witnesses claimed he'd entered through a red service door near the boys' locker rooms. I didn't hesitate. I gunned the cruiser through puddles and pulled into the rear lot, straight up next to the van they'd mentioned. It was locked. No signs of life inside. Every door, including the trunk, was shut tight. Something about that silence made my stomach turn. I walked up to the red door, unholstered my flashlight, and pushed it open. The gym hallway beyond was cloaked in darkness. The main lights had been switched off, standard lockdown protocol. But with the power out in certain parts of the building, the place felt abandoned, like a hospital left to rot. I used my flashlight to cut through the gloom and made my way toward the front lobby. As I passed each doorway, I checked for movement, half expecting someone to bolt at the sight of a badge. I reached the main office where a woman met me in the doorway, her voice trembling. She whispered that someone had seen the man head toward the boys' locker room and that he might be armed. Her face was pale, soaked with worry. I called for backup immediately, and they confirmed they were en route. Still, I didn't feel right waiting around. Every second mattered. I retraced my path, returned to the hallway I came through, and stood in front of the locker room door. It was heavy and metal and slightly ajar. I pushed it open quietly. There were no windows inside, just rows of old metal lockers and tiled walls stretching off into darkness. The air inside was stale, touched with the faint smell of mold and sweat. A steady stream of air blew through the overhead vent, creating a dull background hiss. But beneath it, there was something else, faint noises. I heard them before I even stepped inside fully. Small, subtle dings, scratchy, almost like fingers brushing against metal. It was impossible to tell exactly where the sounds were coming from. I paused, heart racing. My flashlight cast shaky light on the lockers, creating shadows that danced along the walls. Protocol said I should announce myself, but instinct told me not to. Something was wrong. Something about the rhythm of those noises told me that whatever or whoever was making them wasn't panicking. It was controlled, almost deliberate. I crept deeper in, one foot barely in front of the other, trying not to make a sound. Each time I reached the end of a row, I thought the sounds were behind me again. They shifted as I did, always out of reach. When I got near the back of the locker room, I stopped cold. A metallic slam rang out from the direction of the adjacent room, the section where the boys' football team kept their gear. I jerked toward the noise, gun raised. That part of the room had no door separating it from the rest, just a small archway. The lockers there were oversized like gym lockers, and the shadows were even deeper. I finally called out, "Police!" Voice sharp and loud, cutting through the silence like a blade. That's when I heard it. A muffled scream, young and terrified. A boy's voice calling for help over and over again, but barely audible. I ran toward it, calling again, "Where are you?" Then I heard pounding, metal against metal. A few rows down, I found the source. One of the gym lockers was rattling as something or someone inside beat against it. I crouched and shone the flashlight through the vents. I could just make out the pale face of a boy, maybe 12, crammed inside. He looked exhausted, terrified, sweat covering his forehead. I tried to calm him, told him I'd be back, and sprinted out of the building toward the van. It was gone. That van, white, rusted on the sides, windows tinted to hell. It had been parked just minutes ago, and now it had vanished. I cursed myself for not taking down the plate number. I radioed dispatch with an urgent description and told them to issue an alert to nearby patrol units. Then I ran back into the school and told the staff to end the lockdown, to get keys, to get someone to free the boy. I waited outside the locker room until one of the assistant coaches showed up with a key ring shaking in his hand. When we popped the locker open, the boy nearly collapsed into my arms. His right arm had been cut, not deep, but enough to make a mess. He was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to keep him steady while the school nurse was called. Later, through broken words and long silences, the boy said the man had held a knife to his back and told him to stay quiet. He hadn't screamed until I'd shouted, and even then, he hadn't known if it was safe. He thought the man was going to drag him out to the van during the chaos and disappear with him. The blade wounds weren't serious, but the damage ran deeper than that. That kind of fear stays inside a person. A week later, the van was spotted by a patrol unit outside a 7-Eleven on Route 38. Officers surrounded it and found the man sitting behind the wheel, sipping coffee like nothing had ever happened. When I arrived at the station to see him in cuffs, he looked at me like he didn't even recognize me, just a blank stare. But I remembered his face. And I remembered the boy shaking in that locker, thinking he was going to die there, alone in the dark. I've handled murders. I've walked in on overdoses, standoffs, all of it. But nothing hit me quite like the quiet desperation in that kid's eyes. That day still follows me. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd hesitated, if I'd waited for backup, if the boy had screamed just a few seconds later. The truth is, evil doesn't always kick down doors. Sometimes it just walks in through the back, slow and unnoticed. And sometimes you don't realize how close it got until it's already gone. I was staying at a modest hotel just outside of Trenton, New Jersey, during a solo visit to check out Monroe College. My parents couldn't come with me for the trip, so I made the journey alone, thinking it would be good for me, maybe even fun. After the campus tour and a late lunch at a small diner nearby, I returned to the hotel around 8 in the evening. I wasn't tired yet, so I planned to shower, watch some TV, and get a good night's rest before revisiting the campus the next morning for a department orientation. The room was decent. Basic layout, nothing fancy. Beige walls, a single queen bed, a narrow bathroom, and a closet with those old sliding wooden doors. I dropped my backpack on the desk and flopped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that strange in-between space where you're not quite home, but not quite somewhere new. About an hour after settling in, a shrill alarm went off, loud and jarring, and white light started flashing from the corner of the ceiling. I sat upright, confused. Then a robotic voice came over the speaker system, looping the same announcement. "Attention all guests, please remain in your rooms. The building is in lockdown. This is not a drill." A lockdown? In a hotel? I'd never even heard of that being a thing. I was more intrigued than scared at first. Maybe there was some kind of threat nearby, a robbery or a fugitive hiding out. I didn't know. I figured the alarm would stop soon, so I waited it out. The flashing light continued to blink every 20 seconds, even after the alarm stopped. The announcement kept looping over and over again. Eventually, I turned the TV on just to drown out the repetition. I tried not to overthink it, brushed my teeth, got changed, and crawled under the covers. Still, that strobe light was driving me insane, like a lightning strike every few seconds. It filled the room with harsh, cold flashes that made it hard to relax. Around 9:30, I was debating calling the front desk when the room phone rang. I answered quickly, expecting the receptionist to tell me the alarm had been triggered by accident, or to explain how long it would go on. Instead, a woman's voice, hushed and serious, said, "Sir, please remain calm. I need you to walk to the door, now." Her tone cut through every trace of curiosity I had left. "What's going on?" I asked. "There's someone in your room," she said. "Get out. Right now." Time stopped. I couldn't even process it at first. My eyes darted across the room. The bathroom door was open, and I'd already checked under the bed earlier. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake her voice. It was too specific, too urgent to be a prank or a mistake. My instincts took over. I jumped off the bed, heart pounding, scanning the room again. Then I noticed the closet. One of the sliding doors, the one closer to the bathroom, was open by just an inch or two. The gap was narrow, but wide enough for me to see the pale outline of a face, cheek pressed against the inside of the door, one eye clearly visible. It didn't even blink. It was just watching. For a second, I thought my brain was lying to me, that maybe the shadows and light were playing tricks. But when the door slid silently shut, all doubt vanished. I bolted. I didn't even stop to grab my shoes. I threw the door open and sprinted into the hallway in socks and pajamas. The front desk was only a short distance from my room, and by the time I reached it, I was out of breath and shaking. They'd already called the police. The receptionist, probably the same woman who had phoned me, sat me down and played a piece of security footage for me. It was time-stamped just before 8:30, not long after I returned to my room. The video showed a man pacing the hallway on my floor, stopping at each door and bending down to peer at the locks. Then he got to mine. He pulled out a card and slipped it into the reader. The light blinked green. He let himself in like he belonged there. No hesitation. The next hour or so passed in a blur. The police came. They went into the room with weapons drawn. I didn't go back inside until they were finished. They found the man crouched in the closet behind my suitcase, calmly staring at the wall. He didn't fight, didn't run. just stood up when they called him out and walked out with them like he was used to it. He was in his 40s, with thinning hair and sunken eyes. There was something off about him, like he wasn't entirely there, like his body had arrived, but his mind hadn't caught up. As they walked him through the lobby in handcuffs, he turned his head and looked straight at me. Not just glanced, looked, like he knew me, like we had unfinished business. I couldn't shake that look for weeks. The cops never said what he wanted, how he got the key card, or how long he'd been watching. They said he hadn't spoken a word since his arrest. The hotel comped my stay and offered counseling resources, but what stuck with me the most wasn't the fact that he broke in. It was that he had waited, sat in silence, behind a thin sliding door, watching me walk around, brush my teeth, get into bed, all while I thought I was alone. It was senior year, and I was coasting hard on that familiar wave of apathy we all called senioritis. The town I grew up in was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever really happened unless you made it happen yourself. So, when football season rolled around, people acted like it was the Super Bowl every Friday. Our team was good, and the whole school would show up in droves, even the ones who didn't care about sports, just for something to do. That Friday afternoon, I was stuck in one of those throwaway electives no one actually paid attention in. JJ, my best friend, was in the class with me, so we spent the whole period joking around. He had this smooth charm and turned it on effortlessly, especially around girls. He spun around in his seat and asked Kayla and Ashley if they wanted to hit the game with us later. We already knew them, so it wasn't weird, just two guys making casual plans. After school, JJ dropped me off at home, and a few hours later, he swung back around to pick me up. Then we grabbed Kayla and Ashley, made a pit stop in the school's back lot near the woods, and loaded our backpacks with a few bottles we'd poured out from some Four Locos. The plan was to sneak them into the game in water bottles, real classy stuff. We got there just after kickoff and grabbed the top row of the bleachers, claiming our spot. As the game dragged on, our team was getting pummeled, which was rare, and by the fourth quarter, most of the crowd had started trickling away. The stands thinned out, the field got quieter, and the energy faded fast. But we didn't care. We were buzzed, laughing, talking nonsense, and watching the moon take over the sky as the stadium lights glared down. By the time the game ended and the field lights shut off, it was pitch black. Only the soft glow of moonlight was left. The teams had cleared out. A few kids lingered on the grass or in the parking lot, but we were basically the last ones in the stands. JJ decided to run to the car to grab more of our stash. That's when he came back with an idea. "Let's go into the woods," he said, already grinning. Of course, the girls hesitated. That part of the woods was fenced off for a reason. It wasn't a nature trail or anything. It was overgrown, unlit, and barely used, right behind the school property. But their fear made the challenge more exciting. JJ and I sprinted toward the woods, knowing full well they'd follow us just to avoid being alone in the dark. And they did. We ducked under a torn patch of fencing that generations of kids had used to sneak into the tree line. We stumbled through brambles and down the little hill that led into the thicket. The girls hesitated at the edge while we went deeper, then circled back to spook them. It was stupid, pure teenage chaos, but we were drunk and careless. We split off and hid behind trees, crouching low, waiting for them to get nervous. That's when JJ tapped my shoulder and whispered, "Look over there." My eyes adjusted to the shadows, and between two trees, maybe 15 feet ahead, stood a tall figure. At first I thought it was just another kid trying to scare us, but something about it was wrong. The shape was off, stretched, dark, like it was blending into the trees. It didn't move. Then it spoke. A woman's voice, calm but cold. "You kids shouldn't be in here." The words didn't hit me right away. JJ and I just froze. It wasn't the voice of someone playing around. And the thing that terrified me the most wasn't the voice. It was that the figure seemed to grow closer and taller without moving its legs. There were no steps, no leaves crunching, no sound at all. It just glided toward us, like a shadow stretching under a door. We didn't wait another second. We turned and ran full speed back toward the fence, shouting for the girls. We found them by the edge of the woods, wide-eyed and confused. JJ yelled at them to run, and they did. We all booked it back to the car, breathing hard, tripping over ourselves in the dark. Once inside, we locked the doors and sat in silence. JJ said, "I swear, if you hadn't seen that too, I would have thought I lost my mind." The girls asked if we were messing with them. We weren't. We watched the woods from the car, waiting to see if anyone or anything would come out, but nothing ever did. That night stuck with me. Not in the "wasn't that wild" way, in the "something out there wasn't human" way. But life moved on, and I left it behind. Until that summer. I picked up a custodial job at the school, something I'd done the past few summers. It was easy work and paid better each year I came back. That year there were just 4 of us, 2 older guys who'd been working there forever, another kid my age, and me. I was mowing the grass in the school's central courtyard one afternoon when I spotted someone watching me from an upstairs window. She was an older woman, maybe mid-60s, with short, curly grey hair. Her face was hard to make out through the glare, but she didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. I turned off the mower and waved. No reaction, not even a flinch. I immediately ran inside and told my supervisor. He raised an eyebrow, but followed me to the second floor. When we got there, every classroom door was locked and the lights were off. The room I saw her in was completely empty. My boss laughed it off, told me to grab some coffee, and went back downstairs. I tried to brush it off too. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe I imagined it. I finished up outside, then got started mopping the upstairs hallways. Eventually I found myself in the math wing, the same hallway I'd seen her in. I opened each classroom, flipped on the lights, and got to work, my radio playing low music as usual. I was halfway through mopping the second room when I heard it, soft and deliberate. A woman's voice just outside the doorway saying, "Young man." I froze, turned off the music, listened. Silence. I ran into the hallway and checked the adjacent classrooms, calling out a cautious, "Hello." Every single room was empty. I checked behind desks, peered into closets, even opened the supply cabinets. Nothing. But the moment had already branded itself into my bones. I sprinted downstairs and found my boss again. I told him what I heard. He sighed, clearly annoyed, and came back upstairs with me. I explained what had happened, showed him the hallway again, but there was nothing to show. "Go home," he said. "Take the day off. You look like you need sleep." But it wasn't about sleep. I hadn't imagined her. Not the woman in the woods, not the face at the window, not the voice. They were the same. I felt it in my gut. Something connected them. Same height, same presence, same sick feeling in my chest when she was nearby. It didn't make sense, but nothing else could explain it. From that day on, I refused to mop that hallway. I avoided it for the rest of the summer, never went back near it. To this day, I believe my old high school is haunted. Not just haunted by memories or creaky pipes, but by something real, something watching. And maybe, just maybe, what JJ and I saw in those woods wasn't meant to be seen. It all started on a Monday morning in early October, right around the time the weather finally starts turning in upstate Pennsylvania. I was 15 then, a sophomore in a school where lunch schedules were randomized, which meant I rarely saw my closest friends during the day. That semester, only Liam and Mike shared my lunch period. The rest of my day was just a blur of classes, mostly uneventful. But that morning, everything shifted. First period was astronomy, and I always sat in the far back corner of the classroom near the windows. Our teacher had a reputation for being the sarcastic type. He loved picking on students, but in a way that was more teasing than cruel. When the door opened and a kid none of us had ever seen walked in, the teacher wasted no time. He made the kid introduce himself like we were on a game show. "Craig," he said, short and flat. He was pale, with splotchy, patchy facial hair that looked like he'd been trying for years to grow it out and only got halfway there. Not ugly, not weird looking exactly, but there was something unfinished about him. The only empty seat was right next to mine. He made his way over without making eye contact with anyone until he sat down. That's when he turned, nodded at me and said, "What's up?" I gave a polite "Hey man," and left it at that. He kept the conversation going though, small talk, where he was from, how he hated moving schools. I felt bad for him. I knew how brutal first days could be. I might have been the first person to say anything remotely friendly to him that day. And maybe that's where everything went wrong. Later that period, we were asked to pair up for a partner project. Naturally, Craig asked if I wanted to work together. I said sure. I didn't have any other close friends in that class anyway. We were given laptops to start research, and the moment we began, I realized I didn't like his energy. He tried way too hard to be funny, constantly cracking jokes that didn't land, followed by this awkward, forced laugh that grated on my nerves. Every other word out of his mouth was either vulgar or gross. I'm no prude. I've joked around plenty, but this was different. Something about the tone, the constant cursing, the weird sexual comments. It all felt like he was trying to prove something. By the end of class, we had to exchange numbers to coordinate the project. I gave him mine without thinking twice. The day continued and eventually lunchtime came. Mike was out sick, so it was just Liam and me sitting at our usual table near the back corner of the cafeteria. As we were halfway through our sandwiches, Liam's eyes flicked up and widened. I turned to see Craig walking over with a tray and a big grin. He pulled a chair right up next to me, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "What's up, buddy?" I died a little inside. Liam gave me this look like, "You brought this on yourself." I tried to stay open-minded, give the guy a chance, but just like in class, Craig's jokes were off, his stories were weird, and he didn't seem to understand personal boundaries. Liam gave up trying to be polite about halfway through lunch and mostly stayed quiet while Craig talked. By the end of that lunch period, I knew for sure something was off. It wasn't that he was awkward. Lots of people are. It was something darker. There was a strange intensity to the way he looked at me, like I was more than just a classmate, like I was a solution to something that had been missing in his life. After school, since it was a Friday, I started texting my friend group to make plans for the night. I was walking home, phone in hand, when I got a message from an unknown number. "Turn around," it said. I froze. I turned my head, and sure enough, Craig was running down the sidewalk toward me, waving like we'd been best friends for years. I forced a smile as he caught up. He asked where I lived, and I told him vaguely. He said he lived nearby too. Then he asked if I wanted to hang out and finish the project over some beers. I laughed awkwardly and told him I had plans with friends later. Real plans, not an excuse. He pressed for details, and I said we were just chilling at Liam's house. That was when he asked if he could come. It caught me completely off guard. I scrambled to come up with something. "Liam's mom doesn't let people she doesn't know come over," I said. It sounded believable enough. He didn't push, but he kept walking with me all the way to my house. When we reached my driveway, I tried to end the interaction as politely as I could. "All right, man, see you Monday," I said, and gave him a quick fist bump. He nodded, walked down the sidewalk, and then turned around to glance at the house again. That glance was enough to make me uneasy. I texted my group chat immediately, telling them how weird the guy was. Liam responded fast, saying he got the same vibe during lunch. We all decided to meet up at Liam's house later that night, but not until around 9. A couple hours passed, and I was still home alone. Then Craig texted me again. "Yo, what's going on in front of your house? Why is there a cop car?" I jumped off my bed and ran to the front window. There were no flashing lights, no cop car, just Craig standing in the driveway. He saw me, and burst into laughter like he had pulled the greatest prank ever. "I got you," he said, still giggling. "Thought you were heading to Liam's?" I told him I was leaving soon. "Why are you being weird?" I asked. His expression shifted. The smile faded. He looked hurt, offended even. I said I had to go and shut the door, locking it fast. Moments later, I got another text. It was long and bitter. He accused me of being like everyone else, said he thought I was different. I didn't even know how to respond. That night, I went to Liam's house trying to forget about it. We played games, talked trash, just normal teenage stuff. Around 11, I headed home. The house was quiet. My parents and sister were out. I locked the door and went up to my room. A while later, the doorbell rang, except it wasn't the front doorbell. It was the back one. We had a doorbell near the kitchen entrance and the chime was different. I paused, heart starting to race. The backyard was dark, but from the window near the back door, I could tell no one was standing directly in front. Still, I opened the main door, keeping the screen locked, and peeked through the glass. No one there. I leaned forward, and that's when I heard it, the quiet scrape of a shoe dragging across the concrete just out of view to the left. I shut the door, locked it tight, and sprinted upstairs. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Craig. I didn't answer. Then he texted, "Come outside, bro." My reply was fast. "I'm calling the cops." He responded with, Okay, I'm leaving." That confirmed it. It was him out there. I sent screenshots of the text to my family and friends. I also emailed them to the school. The next morning, the principal called my parents and told us that Craig's family had a history of similar issues. They moved around a lot because of him. He didn't come to school on Monday, or Tuesday, or ever again. Word got around that he had transferred again. No details, no warning, just vanished. The whole thing might have ended there, but the damage was done. For weeks, I flinched every time the doorbell rang. I kept my curtains closed and checked every shadow in the backyard. I still don't know what would have happened if I'd gone outside that night. But I do know that letting someone into your life, even a little, can sometimes be all they need to force their way in further. I learned that lesson too late. I live in a quiet part of New Brunswick, in one of those rural towns where everything's spread out and nothing really changes. Our high school and middle school shared a building, a weird setup that somehow made sense when your entire community fit into a couple of square miles. It was early September, first day back after a long summer, and for me, it was a return I hadn't been looking forward to. I'd been held back senior year due to missing too many credits, so I was coming back as a 19-year-old surrounded by kids a year younger than me. I felt out of place immediately, but I kept my head down and just tried to get through it. My first period that day was study hall. The room was unusually quiet. Everyone looked tired or bored or both. That's when I noticed him, someone I didn't recognize. New faces were rare around here. He sat alone on the far side of the room, not speaking to anyone. Something about him felt off. He was pale, lanky, with messy hair and a weirdly stiff posture. I figured he was new, so I walked over to say hi. "I'm Mason," I said. He looked up slowly, then told me his name was Chester, said he'd just moved here. I offered to show him around after class, figuring I'd be nice. No one likes to be the new kid. He nodded and followed along as I pointed out the halls and different classrooms. But while I was walking him through the school, he started asking strange questions. At first, it was typical stuff. How long I'd been at the school, who the strict teachers were, where the gym was, but then it got weird. "What's your address?" he asked casually. I paused mid-step, thrown off. "Sorry?" I asked, pretending not to hear. He repeated the question. I laughed it off and didn't answer, brushing past it like it was a joke. Then he asked if I had Snapchat. That felt more normal, so I gave it to him and we moved on. The rest of the day was unremarkable until final period, English. It was a smaller class, maybe 10 of us. I was placed in one of the lower-tier English groups, so it didn't surprise me. I sat in my usual spot near the back and happened to glance over my shoulder. There was Chester, sitting a few rows behind me, eating some awful-looking sandwich with meat I couldn't even identify. But what really unsettled me wasn't the sandwich. It was the way he was staring at me while eating it, like I was supposed to be impressed or something. Then he raised his hand and gestured for me to come over. I ignored him. Our teacher, Mr. Bess, was getting ready to start, and I wasn't about to get up and look weird. A few minutes into class, I glanced back again. He was still staring, only now his face looked more tense, his expression more annoyed. He gestured again, more aggressively this time, but I kept ignoring him. That's when my phone vibrated. It was a message from Chester on Snapchat, just 2 words. "Follow me." I replied, "Can't. In class." A minute later, I saw him raise his hand and ask to go to the bathroom. Mr. Bess nodded, and Chester walked out. Something in me felt pulled. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe unease. But 5 minutes after he left, I raised my hand too and asked to use the bathroom. I figured I'd just take a peek and see where he went. When I stepped into the hall, it was quiet. I didn't see anyone at first, so I checked down each hallway. Finally, I spotted him, about 50 feet away, walking slowly and deliberately toward a section of the school rarely used anymore. That hallway was lined with locked rooms, storage closets, old administrative offices, maintenance doors. At the very end was a metal door that led to the basement. I followed from a distance, not making a sound. I saw him reach the basement door, open it, and slip inside. Then the door shut. That was the moment I realized just how wrong this felt. The school basement wasn't used for anything anymore. It was mostly boiler rooms and long-abandoned equipment storage. No one had any business being down there, especially not a student. I stood there frozen for a few seconds, trying to decide if I should go after him. My gut screamed, no. Eventually, I turned around and went back to class like nothing happened. Back in my seat, I tried to shake the tension off, but then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Chester. "Why didn't you enter the basement?" I didn't reply right away. A few moments later, another message came through. It was a photo. Him sitting in what looked like a pitch-black basement hallway, still holding that disgusting sandwich, grinning. Then another text. "Come down." That was it for me. I responded with a blunt, "Leave me alone," and then blocked him. I didn't want anything more to do with whatever this was. The rest of the day went by without any more incidents. When I got home that evening, I tried to put it out of my head and focus on schoolwork. It was late by the time I finished, maybe close to 11. My parents were out for the night, probably having dinner with friends, and my sister was at her boyfriend's place. The house was silent. I locked up, turned off most of the lights, and was just about to head upstairs when I got another notification. Snapchat. Someone had added me. The username was "Why didn't you enter the basement?" I felt a chill crawl up my back. It had to be him. I blocked the account immediately. Not even 2 minutes later, another request came through. "Why do you block me?" Then a third. This one hit me like a punch. "I know where you live." And then, "I'm right outside." That was the exact moment I heard glass shatter downstairs. My heart slammed into my ribs. I grabbed my phone and called the police, stammering through what was happening. The dispatcher told me to find a safe place to hide and stay on the line. I whispered that I was heading into the hall closet near the staircase. I left the phone on but muted it. As I crouched behind boxes and coats, I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, moving from the kitchen through the living room, then up the stairs. They creaked with every step. My breath caught as I saw the faint outline of someone at the top of the stairs. Then the figure walked slowly down the hallway. Chester. He looked exactly the same as earlier, same clothes, same stiff walk, but now there was something almost mechanical in the way he moved. He stood outside the closet door and paused. My hand gripped the floor, frozen. Then the door creaked open just an inch. I had ducked behind an old plastic storage bin, pressed back as far as I could. He reached around, fumbling for a light switch, but gave up when he couldn't find it. Then, without saying anything, he turned and walked away. A few seconds passed. Then I heard the front door open. And this time, the knock wasn't from Chester. It was the police. I stumbled out of the closet, shaking, and let them in. I told them everything. They swept the house, but Chester was already gone. The window in the basement had been pried open. That's how he got in, and how he escaped. I gave the cops the usernames from the Snapchat messages and explained the entire history from earlier that day. They said they'd do everything they could to trace the accounts. Chester. The next morning, I walked straight into the school office and asked to speak with the principal. I explained the whole thing. When I said Chester's name, the principal paused and looked confused. He told me there was no one enrolled at the school by that name. No student records, no transfer files, nothing. He had never been a student. They pulled the security footage from the hallway. What they found was even worse than what I imagined. Chester, or whoever he really was, had entered the school through a back entrance, avoided the main offices, and blended in with the students. No one had questioned him because he looked like he belonged. The school filed a report and promised to increase security, but that didn't help me sleep any easier. To this day, I have no idea what that guy wanted. Maybe he was just disturbed. Maybe he had a plan. All I know is, something about that basement meant something to him. And if I had followed him through that door, I don't think I'd be here telling this story. It happened during the last week of my senior year, back in 2016. By that point, the school year had pretty much deflated. The teachers were more relaxed, most classes were coasting through their last topics, and the energy around campus was light, like the calm before a long break. That day, I had decided to skip class with my best friend, who everyone called Moose. We had a regular routine, sneaking out to smoke in my car, which we always parked in the far end of the senior lot near the edge of the woods. Around noon, I got a text from Mario, another friend who was hanging out in the cafeteria. He told me to come inside and chill. Moose and I shrugged, figured why not, and made our way across the lot toward the school. We decided to re-enter through one of the back doors by the band and chorus rooms, the ones that didn't get much attention. Just as we were approaching the door, Mario sent another text, just one line that stopped us in our tracks. School's going into lockdown. And right then, we saw it. The tiny red lights above the exit signs had started blinking, a visual cue that meant exactly what Mario said: lockdown. The back door we'd been approaching was still unlocked, which meant we could get in. So we slipped inside, stepping into a part of the school that was unusually quiet and out of the way. The music wing had always been low traffic. No one came down here unless they had rehearsal or class. The main lights were off, leaving only dim backup lighting and those pulsing red indicators. I started texting Mario again, trying to get more details. He responded quickly at first. "Dude, holy..." but then stopped. The little 3 dots that show someone is typing appeared for what felt like forever, then disappeared. No follow-up. I sent 3 question marks, waiting, no reply. Moose and I just stood there in the long, empty hallway, our backs to the locked auditorium doors, trying to figure out what to do. The silence in that part of the building was unnerving. There were no teachers, no staff, no announcements. Just the soft mechanical buzz of the backup lights and that creeping sense of dread you only feel when something is very wrong. Moose tapped my shoulder and pointed toward the far end of the hallway. At first I thought it was just someone hurrying to shelter. A teacher maybe, or another student. But as the figure moved closer, something felt off. The man was dressed all in black and was speed-walking toward us. His movements weren't normal, too exaggerated and determined. And then we saw his face, or rather what was on it. He was wearing a mask, not a costume store mask. This thing was disgusting, pale and sagging like rotting skin stretched into a twisted smile. I'd never seen anything like it. It didn't look theatrical. It looked personal, like someone made it themselves. The closer he came, the more certain I was that this wasn't a drill. We turned and bolted back down the hallway. Our first instinct was to try the band room, hoping the teacher, Ms. Bryant, was still inside. We pounded on the door, but it was locked. Moose didn't wait. He turned and disappeared around the corner. I had no idea where he went. I looked back and saw the masked man still moving toward us, not running, just walking fast like he knew where we were headed. I chose the nearest hiding spot, a narrow storage closet used by the music department. I slipped inside, shut the door, and turned off the light. The only illumination came from the hallway, faintly visible through the glass panel in the closet door. I crouched behind a tall plastic storage container and did my best to stay quiet. The footsteps were coming closer again. I lowered my head, breathing slowly, barely daring to blink. Everything was dead silent. When the steps finally stopped, I took a risk. I looked up. The masked man was standing right outside the door, face pressed toward the glass, eyes scanning the inside. His mask was even worse up close, cracked, dirty and warped in a way that made it seem like it had once been a real face. I ducked down fast, hoping he hadn't seen me. The doorknob rattled. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. I could hear him step inside, brushing against the shelves. He reached for the light switch, missed it, fumbled for a few seconds, and then gave up. His footsteps moved away, fast, vanishing as quickly as they'd come. I waited for another minute, maybe two, before I pulled out my phone. I had a long text from Mario. He explained everything. Someone had been stabbed in the first-floor bathroom. Some guy in a white mask. The school had gone into full lockdown after that. Moose had also texted me, letting me know he was okay. He had run back outside to my car. I decided that was my best move too. I peeked into the hallway, empty. No sign of the man. I sprinted back the way we came and pushed through the back exit. When I reached the car, Moose was already inside, nervously watching the front of the school. I climbed in beside him, heart still pounding as police cruisers began swarming the parking lot. Within minutes, there were officers with rifles entering the building, helicopters circling overhead. We stayed parked there, just watching in stunned silence. After about 30 minutes, they began releasing students, one classroom at a time, with police escorts. Kids were pale, quiet, scared. No one said much. And even after all that chaos, they never found the masked man. Somehow, he slipped away, most likely through one of the other back exits, just like the one we used. The whole event was kept under wraps. No interviews, no press inside the building. But everyone who was there knew. Someone had walked into our school, stabbed a student, and escaped without being caught. We never found out who he was. I still wonder how close I came to being the second victim. If that closet hadn't been unlocked, if I'd hesitated for even 5 more seconds in that hallway, I don't think I'd have made it out. Not everyone believes me when I describe that mask, but I remember every detail, because it wasn't the mask that made it terrifying. It was the way the man wore it, like it was his real face. I went to a high school in California that had a reputation for being well-managed. Clean campus, decent test scores, involved staff. We had all the standard safety protocols, and once a month, like clockwork, we'd have our lockdown drills. You could tell who was new based on how seriously they took them. Most of us had gotten used to treating them like forced naps. The routine was always the same. Lights off, doors locked, huddle in the corner, wait in silence. We didn't really believe something would ever happen for real. Until one day it did. It was during my lunch period. I was in the cafeteria sitting with a few friends just halfway through my tray of food when one of the teachers who monitored the lunchroom grabbed the mic and told everyone to quiet down. I'd never heard his voice sound like that before. There was something different in the way he spoke, urgent, strained. He announced that the school was going into lockdown and instructed everyone to stay silent and stay in place. At first, the room fell into that confused sort of murmur where people laugh nervously or glance around for confirmation that it's a joke. But then we all looked up and saw the fear in the teacher's face, and something shifted. It wasn't a drill. No one said it aloud, but we all felt it. Within seconds, the cafeteria went dead silent. People ducked under tables, pushing their trays aside, crouching low. I followed my friends, sliding under the table near the back of the room. My heart was racing, but I was still trying to convince myself it was probably just an overreaction, maybe a fight, a false alarm. Then it happened. A sharp, echoing crack rang out from somewhere across the school, distant but distinct. A gunshot. There was no mistaking it. The panic that had been building broke loose instantly. A few kids screamed. Some sprinted for the exit, while others clung to each other under the tables. The teacher tried shouting for everyone to stay calm and stay hidden, but the cafeteria had exploded into chaos. I remember everything vividly. The cold tile against my knees, the pounding in my chest, the way I couldn't stop looking at the doors even though I was terrified of what I might see. For a few moments there was only noise, movement, fear. The exits at the sides of the cafeteria were packed with students shoving each other in a blind rush to get out. I stayed put, unsure of whether running or hiding was safer. That indecision might have saved my life. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Screams erupted again, louder this time from the far end of the room. Chairs toppled, tables were knocked aside. People were running not just out, but away from something, or someone. That's when I saw him. A boy, no older than any of us, standing on the other side of the cafeteria with a gun in his hand, pointing it at the doors. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't saying anything. Just standing there with the weapon, looking out of place, like he was frozen in the middle of something he couldn't control anymore. He lifted the gun and started firing at the glass entrance. The bullets didn't immediately shatter the thick glass, but the noise, the force of it, sent another wave of panic through the room. People screamed. Dozens of students rushed through the emergency exits while others ducked lower, scrambling on hands and knees to get away. I remember crawling under tables, following my friends as we made our way toward the side exit, never standing, barely breathing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We made it outside. The air hit my face like a slap, cold, open, terrifying. Students were scattering in every direction, sprinting across the front lawn, some hopping fences into nearby yards, others heading straight down the streets. I didn't know where I was going, I just ran. The school disappeared behind me, the noise fading with each step. I kept running until I reached the corner near my neighborhood. That's when I saw the flashing red and blue lights. Police cars were pulling up fast, sirens wailing. I didn't stop to talk to them, I just kept moving until I reached my house. When I got home, I burst through the door and told my parents everything. My dad immediately turned on the TV, and within minutes, the news was already reporting on the shooting. Reporters stood outside the school gates, repeating what little information they had, that a student had opened fire in the cafeteria, that there were injuries, that police had entered the building. Miraculously, only one person had been seriously wounded, a girl who'd been near the entrance when the gunman began shooting. Somehow, the police had managed to apprehend him without using lethal force. They arrested him right there, gun in hand. Later, we learned the shooter had been a student, a loner type. There had been warning signs, apparently, dark posts online, strange behavior, but nothing that anyone had taken seriously. Nothing that had triggered enough alarm to stop what happened. In the following weeks, the school brought in grief counselors and changed lockdown protocols, but the fear didn't leave. Not really. Every time I walked into that cafeteria again, I found myself glancing toward that same glass door, remembering the sound of it being fired on, remembering the way everyone's faces twisted in fear. I wish I could say things felt normal again after that, but they didn't. The sense of safety we once had, false or not, was gone. The drills weren't hypothetical anymore. They were reminders. And for me, the cafeteria wasn't just a place to eat lunch anymore. It was a place where everything had almost ended. The school I went to was in a rough part of town, a crumbling neighborhood where most of the buildings were decades old and resources were stretched thin. It was the kind of place where every hallway reeked of mildew, the heating barely worked, and the closest thing we had to a school counselor was a single overworked vice principal. Security wasn't much better. No guards, no buzz-in system, just old doors and prayers. Lockdown drills were common, almost routine, but that didn't make us feel safer. Everyone knew that if something real happened, we'd be on our own for far too long. It was midwinter, one of those bitterly cold mornings when even the windows seemed too stiff to open. The sky outside was grey and heavy, and the building felt unusually quiet. I was in my third period history class. We were halfway through the lesson when we heard it, shouting, loud and sharp from somewhere outside. It was hard to tell what was being said, but it wasn't normal. It sounded angry, frantic. Our teacher froze mid-sentence. He walked to the nearest window and cracked it open slightly. The noise stopped almost instantly, like whoever had been yelling knew we were listening. He hesitated for a second, eyes scanning the parking lot, then shut the window. Before he could say anything, the intercom crackled to life. The dean's voice came over the speaker, flat but firm. "Attention, we are now going into lockdown. I repeat, this is not a drill." The room changed instantly. The teacher jumped into motion, locking the door and shutting off the lights. We all moved into the far corner of the room, just like we'd practiced a dozen times. No talking, no noise. We crouched against the walls, some of us trying to act calm, others already shaking. The silence was thick, and time slowed down in a way I can't really describe. Then we heard the screaming again. Only this time it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the school, closer. It wasn't the voice of a student either. It was a grown man, his voice unhinged and wild, shouting nonsense. Some of it we couldn't make out, but the parts we could were worse. He screamed about being sick of it and how they all had to stop. It sounded like someone unraveling in real time, and his voice was getting closer. The walls were thin. We heard everything. The pounding started next, fists slamming against a nearby classroom door. We heard the kids in the next room over start to scream, their voices muffled but frantic. We didn't know what was happening, but we could hear it clearly, crashing, crying, the sound of something heavy hitting the door again and again. Then came the footsteps, closer, louder, until they stopped right outside our own classroom. And then the banging began. He started slamming against our door with his full weight, yelling through the small rectangular window like a man possessed. His words were disjointed, furious, mixing curses with rambling phrases that made no sense. Some kids around me started to cry quietly. One girl beside me was covering her mouth with both hands, trying not to sob. I could feel my own chest tightening, my breath getting shorter. I just sat there, frozen, watching the window. His face appeared at the glass. He was older, maybe in his 50s, unshaven, with wild eyes and a torn jacket. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then he pulled back, raised his elbow, and started smashing it into the glass pane of the door, again and again, until the glass cracked. Then finally it gave. A jagged hole opened in the window, and his hand shot through it. We all gasped. He reached around, fingers searching for the lock. Our teacher didn't hesitate. He grabbed the first object he could find, a pair of scissors, and without saying a word, stabbed the man's arm. Not once, but twice. The man let out a wail of pain, staggered back, and slammed his hand against the door again, this time in frustration. He cursed, shouted something incoherent, then stormed off down the hallway, still yelling and banging on lockers as he went. We stayed huddled in that dark room, breathing hard, listening. No one moved, no one spoke. It felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes before we heard police shouting down the hallways. Then came the all-clear signal over the intercom. The lights stayed off, but we were told not to leave the room until officers personally escorted us. Eventually the door opened and 2 officers entered with flashlights. One of them nodded to the teacher, who was still gripping the scissors, hands shaking. They told us the man had been apprehended at the end of the hallway. He was unarmed but clearly unstable. They were taking him for a psychiatric evaluation. That should have been the end of it. But the damage was already done. The image of that man's face pressed to the glass, the sight of his arm forcing its way into the room, the sound of his voice breaking apart with rage, it stayed with me. It still does. The school tried to move on quickly, repainting the door, replacing the window, even bringing in a counselor for a few days. But nothing ever really got explained. We heard rumors that he'd been a former parent, someone whose child had transferred years ago, someone who blamed the school for something they couldn't control. But nothing was confirmed. He disappeared into the system, and the school brushed it all aside. For most of my classmates, it became just another crazy story to tell years later. But for me, it never really turned into a story. It remained a memory, raw, vivid, and terrifying. Because the truth is, that day showed me how fragile the illusion of safety is. All it takes is one unlocked door, one broken mind, and a few minutes to change everything.